brought Energia to the market. Basically, three reasons. First of all, to show that up to 150 includes also the up to 50 seat segment where we believe change can happen. Secondly, because we believe this is the moment to talk to partners, because there's a lot of parties in the market active in this segment, and we wanted to open a dialogue with those partners. And thirdly, last but certainly not least, is we also want to talk to customers, because as you know, the up to 50 seat segment is getting smaller and smaller over the years. And we really want to understand from customers how they see the future. So those three aspects really drove us to come up with the Energia family.
Welcome to Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. Our mission is to show the many paths to net zero for an industry that is one of the hardest to decarbonize. So, every week we speak with airline, airport, travel, and technology executives to help separate the signal from the noise. Whether you're a frequent flyer, an airline executive, if you care about sustainability, or just love traveling, welcome aboard. This is a show by Simpliflying, who have been helping build trust in travel for over 15 years. This season of the podcast is brought to you by Cirium, which is empowering the global aviation industry to reach a more sustainable future with the most accurate aircraft emissions data. The show is also supported by Carbon Click, leaders in managing carbon offsetting programs for top global airlines. Without further ado, here is your host, Shashank Nigam, CEO of Simpliflying.
Embraer's vision is to decarbonize regional aviation through a mix of electric hybrid, and even hydrogen aircraft in the future. But the most important thing I learned from both Arjan and Rodrigo is that they are practical. They are not building a concept airplane for way too much in the future. Instead, they are working on something practical, something that can be done today and that they can deliver on promises. So join me in this conversation as I find out about what one of the largest OEMs, airframers in the world has on their plate when it comes to decarbonizing aviation. Arjan and Rodrigo, thank you so much for joining us today. Embraer's roadmap towards a sustainable future encompasses the development of products, services, sustainable technologies. You have 50 years of market experience, but you're taking a very different path towards the future of aviation, specifically sustainable aviation. Arjan, perhaps you can start with an overview of where is Embraer's approach taking it and what is your stand?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, Shashank, for having us on the podcast. Yeah, it's a very good question. Embraer has been the number 3 OEM in the world, but the number 1 in the regional aviation segment. We've been very clear that we are active in the up to 150 seat segment, which we have expanded over the last number of years with the introduction of the E2 family. But of course, before the COVID crisis, we already had a lot of focus on sustainability. During COVID, there was a lot of distractions, but I think coming out of COVID, the need to get to a sustainable 2050 is even stronger than ever. We really wanted to go out there and show that Embraer is already a very sustainable company. We have a very sustainable product line, but we also wanted to show that we have ideas as the 3rd OEM, but the biggest in the smaller segment, that we can bring products to life that are completely CO2 neutral, or to a very high extent CO2 neutral with sustainable aviation fuels. So that's why we brought Energia to the market. Basically 3 reasons. First of all, to show that up to 150 includes also the up to 50 seat segment where we believe change can happen. Secondly, because we believe this is the moment to talk to partners, because there's a lot of parties in the market active in this segment, and we wanted to open a dialogue with those partners. And thirdly, last but certainly not least, is we also want to talk to customers, because as you know, the up to 50 seat segment is getting smaller and smaller over the years. And we really want to understand from customers how they see the future. So those 3 aspects really drove us to come up with the Energia family. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about the content. Rodrigo, anything you want to add there?
No, you said it all. I see a lot of opportunities, right? And we have seen a lot of emerging technologies, Sasha, and we are studying that, and it's interesting how many airlines actually come to us to understand what we're thinking, because there is a number of startups out there, but there is a lot of skepticism on how of those new projects we actually make it to real life, and the market in general see Embraer as a very credible OEM that when we say we are going to do something, we're really going to do and bring this to life. So it's interesting to see the recognition of Embraer in the market.
No, that is correct. I have to acknowledge this fact that here we are recording this podcast with Arjan, you joining in us from Amsterdam, Rodrigo, you joining us from Brazil, I am in Canada. This already talks about the global nature of aviation and what we are looking to achieve here. Talking about Energia, when you initially launched it, you had 4 new concepts and propulsion architecture system, each with its own timeline of production. But late last year, in December 2022, you released, now it has been streamlined into 2. Arjan, perhaps can you walk us through that shift and why Embraer now has chosen to focus on hybrid electric and hydrogen fuel cells?
No, absolutely, Shashank. I think what is important, when we started talking about the subject, we brought the 4 different concepts, and what we clearly showed was that depending on the size of the airplane and the range that we're chasing, we see different technologies being feasible. On the lower end, we had a fully electric aircraft, but it was up to 10 passengers, around 200 kilometers range, with reserve fuel. There's a main challenge there on the power to weight ratio of batteries. So currently we are around 200 watt hour per kilogram. We believe we need to get to 500 watt hour per kilogram. So there's a big step already to be made to get to the 10-seat aircraft. But going bigger than that, there's a huge number of unknowns. On the high end, we see that hydrogen to fuel cell gets a lot more complicated. So we were chasing a combustion hydrogen concept. And in the middle, we had a combination of hybrid, and I think Rodrigo can tell a little bit more about the hybrid concept, and a hydrogen to fuel cell combination. And in our second iteration that we did over the year last year, we said, well, the sweet spot, if we look at the market, is probably between the 20 and the 30 seats, maybe a little bit higher than that. And that kind of ruled out fully electric at this point in time. So we've said if we want to focus on that segment, effectively 2 technologies remain. And that's why at the end of 2022, we announced that we want to focus on the middle part of the up to 50 seat segment, and then especially on the hydrogen and on the hydrogen fuel cell and on the hybrid technology.
So what I'm understanding here is you're not trying to see which technology rules. You're trying to hedge your bets and have one on the smaller end and one on the higher end.
Yeah, well, if we take a step back, we believe to get to net zero 2050, there's not going to be a silver bullet that's going to solve everything. So sustainable aviation fuels is really, although it sounds still very remote, it's probably the low-hanging fruit that is a drop-in that can work for us in a pretty big part of the solution to 2050. We believe also hydrogen can be part of the solution, although 2050 is already very close to get to a significant production level of hydrogen, and it needs to be really green hydrogen. And on the lower end, we believe that's where different technologies can be available. So depending on what size and range you want to bring in the market, that also drives the technology. But we believe the combination of all those technologies will give us a shot to get to a net zero 2050. Each of those bullets alone probably will struggle to bring us there entirely. And let's not forget that the biggest chunk of getting to net zero is replacing the old aircraft that we have flying around today by new technology that is today, right? So we tend to talk a lot about sustainability and new technologies, but there's a lot of work to be done there, both on the technology and on the supply chain. Whereas there's aircraft available today, and case in point being the 195 E2, which gives us a 25% fuel burn over previous technology that can already grabbed and being employed as we speak today and tomorrow. So we believe that is really the first step to take as an industry, and then really work parallel paths on technology to get to a net zero 2050.
Rodrigo, do you have anything to add to that on the decision from 4 to 2 from a technology perspective?
Yeah, so our focus has been always, Sasha, to really deliver, right? That's what we are good at, and what we did now was just to prioritize for now what we believe are the solutions of, let's say, the best combination of building a business case for that and the technology readiness. That's where we came down to those two concepts. But we continue to evaluate the others. I had meetings this week about full electric solutions, for instance. It's just that at a certain point we have to prioritize, keep more focus, and for now, the biggest opportunity we see is what Arjan described, right, from 19 to 3rd, perhaps a little bit higher, and on the hybrid electric for an entry into service in 23rd. That would be the earliest, let's say, we could bring one of those more disruptive solutions, and with the fuel cell 2035.
On that, I do have a question here for actually Arjan first, and then Rodrigo. Would you consider retrofitting with someone like Zero Avia or Universal Hydrogen who are doing these retrofit programs? Is that a collaboration you're looking at?
Well, as I mentioned in my answer to the first question, one of the reasons why we are talking about this Energia concept is talking to partners, and the names you just mentioned, those are parties that we are actively talking to. So we're very active, not just internally but also externally, to understand what other parties are doing, because it's exploration level. We're not doing the things that we would do normally to develop a new aircraft. So it is definitely a time to cooperate and get there as an industry. And if you look at the bigger industry, we're talking a lot about OEMs and technology and supply chain, but there's also other things that the industry really needs to consider to do. If you talk about, if you look at Europe, for example, and we look at the single European skies, that's a subject we've been talking for decades now, and we have not been successful. And we're still flying 10, maybe sometimes up to 20% more than we need to, right? So there are definitely steps, and let's also not forget that aviation is 2.5% roughly of the global CO2 emission levels. And I think aviation is taking a big step and setting big targets on itself to get to a net zero 2050. While you could argue that solving the CO2 challenge in aviation is probably the highest apple in the tree that we're trying to fix. Because we're talking about transport on minus 50 degrees, 30,000 feet up in the skies. Weight is playing a big role. Volume plays a big role. So it's not an easy task that we're putting on ourselves. So I think it is. There's a lot of good things happening, and we need to work together to get there.
Absolutely, I think the ecosystem is what everyone's talking about, and we have to work together. You're right.
And as we look at more into the business case for those projects, Sasha, for sure we consider also the retrofit of platforms as perhaps one viable solution to accelerate the introduction of those new technologies. I would say that as of now, we see that as more attractive on the smaller capacity, because in those it's more difficult to justify a completely new development, let's say, than on the bigger ones. And the bigger ones, we see more benefit on designing a new aircraft, optimizing for the use of those new technologies. But as I said, for this year, a lot of the exercise is on the business case, and then we are not restricted to 100% clean sheet design.
So let's talk about the business case. Arjan, when you speak with airlines, you have to make a business case. This is an unproven technology, completely clean slate development. How do you make the business case for the new Energia concepts and aircraft that you're developing?
Yeah, I think that's where you hit the $1 million question straight on the head. And that's why I started also by saying we need to talk to customers to understand how they see these new platforms take a role in aviation in the several years ahead of us. We see some opinions arising in Europe where people are saying, well, short range you should do by train. We're trying to shrink airports because of emissions and noise. That drives the demand for bigger and bigger aircraft where true zero emissions will be very hard to achieve. And we believe those are examples that we also need to fight as an industry because the concepts we're talking about are cleaner and quieter than trains. So we need to watch out what we're spreading in terms of behaviors. So we believe we need to fly differently with these kind of aircraft. So maybe to smaller airports, new networks, trying to connect the hubs differently to make these smaller aircraft work. If we just look at the replacement scenario of aircraft in that size, we talk about a decent market, and I believe there's a business case to be made for aircraft of that size. But if we're able as an industry to behave differently and to fly different networks and to apply those new technologies differently to the market, we believe that the market size could be vastly bigger than just a replacement scenario. So that's really what we tried to find out. We had our big first customer advisory board the end of last year, at the same day that we did the Energia announcement. And the reason why we're doing that is to exactly have those discussions with airlines. How do we apply these technologies and these aircraft in the future aviation system, if you will?
I'm curious, you mentioned you had this customer day. What does this look like? Who are these people who are coming to this customer day? What kind of feedback are you seeking from them, given, again, this is about the future and not necessarily what's happening now?
Well, Rodrigo organized that customer advisory, so I'm sure you you can answer that question.
Yeah, so that's something we do for every new program that we are considering, Sasha. So we did that for the ERJ 145. We did that for the E-Jets E1. I actually participated in that in early 2000, 2002. We did that for the E2, and we are doing that for the Energia. Basically, we invite people that have a good view on the market, right? On the business in general, and also on the high level, let's say, requirements that a product like this should have. So we invite customers, and I would say we were very successful in this one to get good representation of the potential market for those products. So we had customers from Asia Pacific. We had customers from North America, good representation from North America, and actually from Latin America, and of course from Europe, which is, I would say, the center where all those, right, the sustainability discussions are taking place. Not the only place, but certainly the one region where this is more active. So you get a good representation for a global view. And we ask things about how they see the market evolving, how do they see those type of aircraft, for instance, being applied in their network, right? What range should have, what seat capacity should have, what is the economics requirements, and with those input, we feed this back to our advanced design to refine the product and continue working. We expect to have another of those meetings more towards the end of the year, and with that we go, let's say, understanding more market requirements, product and technology possibilities until we freeze the concept and we launch the product.
I'm glad to hear this consultative process that you followed. And it's not just something for Energia, but you did this for E2 and the ERJ as well. Now, still staying on the customer aspect, Arjan, you mentioned how SAF or sustainable aviation fuel is the only option right now. One of the realities of our current industry is forward orders. Embraer's order book is so big that you will be producing the current technology planes for a long time, be it ERJ or E2s, which take in the current fuel. But then you're coming up with new concepts around hydrogen fuel cell, electric, which will not use fuel. My question is around transition. How exactly does Embraer work with airlines to transition from kerosene-based aircraft to next generation? Do you see a time in the future where you will not be making any more of the kerosene-powered aircraft, for example, and how do you prepare the market for that?
Yeah, I'll take it for a shot at that, Shashank. I think if you look at our roadmap, and I think we've been quite active in showing our roadmap to the world, we're definitely showing new technologies on the lower end of the spectrum, up to 50, maybe a little bit bigger, that segment. But we're also showing that we are hugely supporting the sustainable aviation angle. So we are working, and we actually did a 100% sustainable aviation flight on our 195 E2. It was on one engine for now, but we did prove that the aircraft and the engine combination can handle 100% SAF. That is going to be a big step because for that segment, we don't see completely net zero solutions on the short term. In the long term, we see hydrogen as a potential alternative. We're even talking about dual fuel solutions where we fly on both. But I think it is too early to assume that that SAF will disappear shortly. So we see that, we support that. We support that also on the production of sustainable aviation fuel side. So that's definitely on the radar, and that is already a big transition that we need to make as an industry. Because maybe not on a technical level, yes, we need to get from 50 to 100% SAF blend, but on the supply of sustainable aviation fuels, we really have a long way to go as an industry. And then I'm not talking about hydrogen, because hydrogen is an even bigger challenge because it's not drop-in. On the new technologies, there's certainly going to be changes. If we talk about hybrid, we're going to talk about electric charging. But of course, there's still also a regular engine on board of that aircraft that will use SAF. And of course, on a hydrogen fuel cell combination, that links to getting access to hydrogen on fields. But I think that question of the supply chain is a little bit further ahead of us. But that transition will have to be made over time. Rodrigo, you want to comment on that?
Yes, I would say that for those size of airplanes, such as like ERJ with 50 or an E2, right, up to 146 seats, the solution for that without the fuel, let's say, as we have today, will be hydrogen, right? The solution for really a zero emission is hydrogen. So far, and that's in our vision, right? In our roadmap, as Arjan said, we plan a large turboprop by 2045 powered by hydrogen, and a jet like an E2, right? An aircraft like the E2 with 100 to 150 seats by 2050 powered by hydrogen. But so that's our view. But we have to recognize that there is a lot of uncertainties yet on how hydrogen, for instance, will evolve. There is a huge need for investment in infrastructure for that to happen, right? We talk about over 1 trillion just in terms of the plants to produce hydrogen, the infrastructure to distribute that, and all this. So answering our question, yes, we do see a scenario where we don't use the fossil fuel anymore by any means, right? That we only have a zero emissions aircraft, but not a lot has to happen until then, and we continue to monitor all our possibilities.
On this, you've talked about a small aircraft, which is electric. You've talked about a medium-sized regional aircraft, which is hydrogen fuel cell. Are you exploring a larger aircraft as well, which is more than 100 seat, like an E190, operating on hydrogen? Is that something on the cards?
Shashank, at this moment, the really new technologies like hydrogen hybrid, we're really focusing at the size of aircraft where we believe it makes most sense, and that's on the sub 50 seat. As we just discussed, we do believe that when hydrogen gets to the market, when supply chains pick up, and when it's more it can be considered more of a drop-in fuel by then because it's a more common use. I think that could be a point that we're also looking at hydrogen on our bigger aircraft. But in the roadmap, the initial focus is really in the up to 50 seats. As you know, we've even been talking about a turboprop that we were still talking about conventional engines with 100% SAF. So even on that size, getting close to 100 seats, we're not yet looking at hydrogen solutions at this point in time. We believe that's more something for the future, and we'll focus on the lower end.
That's fine. Let's look at another segment where Embraer is very strong in, which is executive aviation or business aviation.
Mm-hmm.
How are you seeing that space evolve, especially because that's one sector that comes under criticism from climate activists and green groups? How is that evolving, and how do you actually foresee business aviation ever becoming green or greener than today, and what is Embraer doing about it?
I believe executive aviation can focus on sustainable aviation fuel. The typical nature of executive aviation is that they don't fly a scheduled network like airlines do. So if you go to more advanced and I'd say new means of fuel like hydrogen, the introduction is going to be a challenge. And I think it can partly be addressed because there are fixed city pairs when you can fly these aircraft. Executive aircraft are just employed completely differently. So I think for those aircraft to be flying on hydrogen, I think that's going to be a much more distant future. But let's not forget that sustainable aviation fuel is a perfectly sensible way to proceed on. So I think that makes all the sense. And if you look at range requirements of executive jets, solutions like electric and hybrid are just much harder to apply. So I think sustainable aviation fuel is the way to go there.
Okay, sure. That does make sense. The other aspect that is important today, flying today, is around cabin innovations. I know, for example, you've recently launched with Porter Airlines in Canada, and they've just started flights to Meijer Airport, which is Vancouver. Mm-hmm. What are some of the innovations that you're making inside the cabin to promote a more sustainable way to fly?
Rodrigo, you want to take that one?
Yeah, for sure. One interesting project that we have here, Sasha, is to look at recyclable materials, right, to be used in the interior. So we have in our technology development group a specific focus on looking how can we make actually the entire aircraft more recyclable. And of course, for the aluminum is easier to think about. And a good part of the exercise is how we make the interior of the aircraft more recyclable. And then we are actively looking at several different materials that can be introduced. And we have solutions that can actually be introduced more in the short term, right? And we try to accelerate that and even offer in our current aircraft. But there are other also with technology readiness more, down to the future. But that, I would say, that's a way to look at. The other thing is, of course, for instance, in flight entertainment, we are focusing on wireless solutions for now. So we have less, let's say, wiring and hardware distributed in the cabin, so people you offer a wireless service, and the people can use their own devices, let's say, to have access to in-flight entertainment. I think those two are the main solutions that we are thinking in terms of sustainability. In terms of passenger experience in general, something that we have done on the E2 is to have significant larger overhead bins, so the every passenger can take its own roller bag on board. That's already offerable on E-Jets. Is the aircraft, I would say, with the largest space to take roller bags on board. And of course, as we look at the new aircraft, I think customers will look for that convenience as well. So we consider that for any new project that we will be doing.
You're right. I think a lot of us who travel long haul or on wide bodies take it for granted. But in regional aircraft, it is indeed a big thing and a great improvement for passenger experience to be able to bring on your carry-on and comfortably put it on. It's interesting you mentioned recyclable materials. So I'm hoping to see a recyclable tag on how to recycle on some of the seats or some of the interiors sometime soon on an E2 jet somewhere.
We are investing to do that.
Yeah, and Shashank, don't forget that also on the E2, we did not change our seating configuration, right? So we improved what could be improved, but we stuck to our 2-and-2 configuration because we keep believing that customers don't like middle seats. So we believe the cross section of the E-Jets is great for customers. We did the same on the E2, and we even applied that same cross sections to the turboprop that we have on the drawing table, right? So we're improving what needs improvement, but we're especially not fixing what isn't broken.
That's good to know. I'm glad that reduces per passenger footprint anyway, so that helps. One of the other interesting projects you have running is the Eve Air Mobility, which is an independent company around the urban air mobility or eVTOL ecosystem. Can you walk us through the difference in the lineup that Eve offers versus Energia aircraft and why two separate brands?
Yeah, we can. As a matter of fact, I'm talking about up to 150 seats, but if we take the microscope, we're actually talking about the lower segment being 9 to 50 seats. And we call that segment Regional Air Mobility, REM. We're talking about 200 to 500 nautical miles, really small aircraft. It's mostly runway based. So that is really belonging to commercial aviation, and that's where Energia plays its role, and that's where we have the concept on the drawing table for entry into service 2030 and beyond. Eve is a different animal. Eve is a 4-passenger vehicle, plus one being the pilot. We're talking a range up to 60 miles, so it's smaller and it's really a lot less range. It doesn't fall under regional air mobility, but we call it urban air mobility. So the design is really to be applied to intra-city mobility. It's fully electric, so it's fully sustainable, and it's also earlier on the timeline. So the Eve product is expected to be certified late 2025. So it is, even though it sounds like both being small aircraft, they really belong into different distinct categories.
And like how you separate this or distinguish this based on capacity and whether you need a runway to take off or a helipad, for example, I'm also curious to see how markets play a role. So, for example, for Eve, is it the densely populated cities in Brazil, getting around from in different areas of Rio, for example, versus, let's say, your hydrogen fuel cell regional jet, which might be very applicable in Scandinavia, where you have regional distances for someone like Widrow, for example. And if you look at other types, how do you do this market assessment? Which aircraft flies where? I'm curious to get behind your heads in how this planning works.
Yeah, that's a great question, and of course we like to describe two distinctly different categories, but there will be overlaps. So you hear in the market about eVTOLs being used to feed airports. Airports are normally pretty close to airports, mostly within the 60-mile range. So I think that is an application that we could see to transport aircraft from the city straight into the airports, especially for the high premium passengers. You could see some applications in smaller densely populated areas where you could see some intra-city transport within that same range, or maybe a little bit more. I think regional mobility. We will be looking more at either hub feeding or secondary to secondary, or maybe tertiary airport transport, forming different networks, smaller streams. I think in the end, what we have to keep in mind, we like to call our business aviation, but the real product we're supplying is connectivity. And I think one of the risks of the industry as a whole is that we're just keep moving to bigger and bigger aircraft, and we keep dropping off the smaller cities from the maps, and we're actually going backwards on connectivity. So we believe that especially this regional air mobility could be a new feed to allow airlines to fly smaller airports in a fully green manner in the future.
Yeah, if I can add, in many cases we don't need to distinguish, because one of the things that is unique about Embraer, right, in this field is to have a solution for urban air mobility and regional air mobility. So nobody else has this combination. And what actually happens is that some of the customers, right, that are typically Embraer regional operators, they are now seeing the opportunity for the urban air mobility. So some of the EVE is the eVTOL program nowadays with the highest number of aircraft in backlog, and a lot of that actually comes from regional customers from Embraer, right? And the opposite might be true as well. Some of maybe the operators that we start with EVE, for instance, may eventually think about expanding the operations to a regional air mobility between, right, farther distance. So actually, it's up to the customer, right, to see what is the best solution for them, and we can offer the complete package.
Are you seeing better uptake for certain products in certain regions? Let's say, given the EU policies around around incentives and disincentives versus, let's say, the new US policies around the Inflation Reduction Act. Are you seeing uptake for certain products way higher in certain regions or markets?
The different regions, they offer different types of conditions, and I don't see one that is more, let's say, demanding than the other. I'd say the two main ones as at this stage would be North America, Europe, Japan, and perhaps some Australia and New Zealand, right? I think those would be the places with the biggest potential now. And then they have different conditions. In US, for instance, there is a very good potential because of the number of existing airports. The infrastructure is already huge, already built in. So it's about using what is already there. And we see already the connectivity well developed. On the other hand, we see in Europe, for instance, all this incentive, right, and this push to develop new technologies and zero emissions aircraft. So that's another attractive place. And in other places like Japan and New Zealand is good because of their geography, right? It's short distances, so it favors, right, the use of those small, shorter range aircraft, and there is a lot of emphasis on environment as well. So I don't see a clear one region that's clearly ahead of the others of introducing those aircraft. Arjan, don't know if you have a different view.
Actually, I have a follow-on question for Arjan on this. Arjan, you are in Netherlands, which has capped capacity at Schiphol. Airlines are, of course, fighting against it and fighting against the government. But there seem to be governments which are taking completely opposite policies. France has banned all short-haul domestic flights, very, very short-haul domestic flights. Whereas in the UK, they're giving incentives or lowering taxes for short-haul domestic flights. How do you make sense of this, and how does Embraer? What's Embraer's stance? Because you are primarily operating in short-haul.
No, it's very difficult to make sense. I think what is important is that these policies are made on facts of today. So there's a different view in the Netherlands and in France and in the UK. I think what we're talking here is products for the future. I think Embraer sees real and true opportunities to bring aircraft to the market in this segment. And I think that will change the views of the policymakers. I think if we come to a point that we're launching an aircraft that is effectively cleaner than a train, and that we can bring to the market on a total footprint level, better for the CO2 targets that we set ourselves in 2050. I believe the policies will align on that, and countries will make sure that those products can be introduced. So I wouldn't look too much on the policies of today on where that will move in the next 20 to 30 years. But I think it is important that even if policies don't allow it today, airlines need to keep looking at these solutions and help us push for changes in policies to make it happen. But I think we'll get that done.
I keep thinking about a comment you made earlier, where you're trying to build a plane that's way cleaner than just rail transport today. But this plane is still decades away, where it will be end-to-end much cleaner than rail transport. But the government policies of today are shaping passenger behavior. They are encouraging, let's say, people to take trains in France from Paris to Lyon, or they're encouraging people to fly from London to Edinburgh based on the latest UK tax cuts. Habits are formed now, but our solution as an industry is decades away. How do we deal with that?
There is only a limited number of city pairs where full replacement by train actually works. There's a lot of destinations that you can fly from in Europe, and if you want to go there by train, you have several transitions during your trip. The costs are a lot higher. I think the alignment that we have, even though we have a way to go to further improve it, I think the general alignment of aviation across Europe and also what you see across the US is a lot more seamless than what we're seeing on railroads, for example. So I think the policies might make sense on a Paris-Lyon, where there's a TGV operating in a very high-speed manner. But whether it works from another city in Paris, right, with the same distance, that's to be seen. So I think there's a lot of wishful thinking in these policies. I think no one in aviation would argue that their train can be a complement to aviation. And again, it's all about connectivity. It's not about airplanes or trains. It is about how it together provides the connectivity in the future. And we've always seen that new products will drive policy changes. And I think that's what we will see in this segment as well. If we bring truly green aircraft to the market, I think countries will make sure that those aircraft can be introduced in the aviation environment, if you will.
That's interesting. I actually had the CEO of Star Alliance on this podcast, Jeffrey Go, the former CEO now, who talked about how they've done a partnership between Lufthansa and Deutsche Bahn. Deutsche Bahn has now joined Star Alliance as the first train company in Germany, where you can seamlessly earn and burn miles across trains and Lufthansa, and you can transit. So I think there are certain areas where this is happening. The other aspect of policy around, especially in Europe, is noise. Sustainability is not just about fuel and efficiency, it's about noise reduction. And I believe in the E2, you have created the quietest single-aisle aircraft. I'm curious to know about, firstly, why you prioritized noise, and secondly, what was your journey to get there?
Well, first of all, we talk a lot about CO2, but noise is definitely not a new topic. So we see noise driving a lot of policies on airports, and we are very much aware that reducing noise helps the marketability of our product. What I would also say is that we've always been intrinsically driven to reduce fuel burn, therefore reduce CO2, and also noise. Reduction in noise is reduction in energy lost. So it makes sense from all directions to build aircraft with the lowest noise levels. I think what Embraer has done with the E2, bringing a new technology engine on that aircraft, a more sophisticated wing, We cleansed the whole aircraft to reduce drag. So I think we didn't just put new engines on an existing aircraft. We went really back and we said, how can we build an aircraft that's better, much better from a CO2 and noise perspective, while keeping a common product for the pilots between the E1 and the E2. And that drove a completely different aircraft, which is almost a clean sheet design, but with the reliability of the previous design. What we have today is the most efficient aircraft in the single aisle space, but also the most quiet aircraft in the single aisle space. So I think it's a huge step forward on our product line, and we very much believe that the 195 E2 is a very strong platform to replace the E1s, but also to complement narrow bodies. If we look today at the seat cost of a 195 compared to a much bigger MAX 8 or A320neo, they're very, very similar, which is quite amazing, as traditionally you would fly a smaller aircraft at lower trip cost, but significantly higher seat cost. So we've brought an aircraft to the market, which of course, will be very attractive for our current E-Jet operators. But we also see new operators embrace the E2 to complement their A220s. We see airlines that operate as low-cost carriers. They add the 195 E2. So it's a quieter aircraft. It's a more efficient aircraft, and it's going to be a very successful aircraft for the years ahead.
Rodrigo, I'm curious, what were some of the technical challenges you had to overcome to make the aircraft quiet? How did you do testing, for example? And how are the airlines taking it?
That's something that I want to complement that actually what Arjan mentioned. What is unique on the E2, different from any other platform, Sasha, is that only the E2 you find the combination of introduction of new technologies, right? Let's say in a mature platform, right? So we took the E1 and we used it, we studied every possible new technology that could be introduced there to make the aircraft more efficient. So the result is an aircraft that, of course, offers more than a simple re-engine, but is also more optimized than a completely clean sheet design. And what we did was to look at our E1 noise data, where we had the noise generation points, right, where we knew exactly what was the optimum flight path, let's say, what we would have to optimize to really do the lowest fuel burn and lowest noise. So I think what helped a lot was an extensive knowledge of the previous generation E-Jet. And then we made on E2, we knew exactly where we needed to improve, where to optimize to make it the quietest and lowest emission aircraft in the single aisle segment.
Very nice. I like how this was just as much about reflection and incremental change as doing something new. I'm glad to hear. And the final question I have is, Embraer itself has committed to complete net zero operations by 2050. And this means Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions. How exactly are you getting there? What are some of the big challenges you have to overcome?
We announced our ESG targets to become carbon neutral by 2040. 2040 is far away, but I think we're making some real progress there. We have a very clear sustainable aviation acquisition strategy in our Melbourne facility, so we're making good progress there. As you may have read in the media, we've signed an MOU with Raízen, which is the subsidiary of Shell Aviation in Brazil, and we want to work with them and incentivize sustainable aviation fuel production in Brazil. So that's going to help us to acquire SAF for our internal operations. Another example, in Gavio Peixoto, we have installed huge amounts of solar panels, which is replacing an annual use of 40,000 cubic meters of natural gas. So I think setting those ESG targets on our Scope 1 and Scope 2 has really driven us to take very clear measures to advance. We for another example is we have a pilot project where we're replacing natural gas by biomethane, which is a renewable fuel from decomposition of organic water. So that's something else we're doing. So we don't just set the targets, but I think we have a very robust action plan with deliverables over the years ahead. And even in the first year following the announcement of the targets, we see some very clear deliverables on our ESG targets. So that's great news.
Yeah, if I can add, Arjan, another target that we had was to use 100% of renewable energy in 2030, right? And actually, we are seeing that in Brazil, we will be able to meet that target already in 2024. So we are actually accelerating, right? As Arjan said, we are trying to establish the targets, and I think they were bold targets, but we actually are trying to beat them as we try to be more sustainable and lower our footprint.
And let's not forget, on a Scope 3 level, we've embraced the net zero 2050 targets of the industry. So all the things that we mentioned today, we believe will contribute to getting there as Embraer, but also as an industry.
Fantastic! I'm excited to see how you are thinking about reinventing regional aviation from an electric, hydrogen hybrid, and regional air mobility perspective. You're checking all the boxes on the different segments, and I'll also at the same time like the focus on regional and not large hydrogen aircraft, for example. And you're still open to having those conversations with other industry partners when you get there.
Embraer is a company that wants to deliver what we promise, and we want to under promise, over deliver. And I think we're not in a market of selling sweet stories, but we really set targets. We want to achieve them, and we want to show the market what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. So it is tangible, and we believe it's achievable, but it's challenging, right? It's not easy, but absolutely. I think we're putting our step forward to help us get there as an industry.
I'm glad to see, because there's a lot of noise in this space, especially when it comes to sustainable aviation. And I'm glad to see you sending the right signals compared to all the noise that is out there. And I do wish you all the best in this journey. Now, the final part of this interview is where we get a bit more personal and the listeners get to know a little bit about both of you. And because I have two guests here, I would like to do it one by one. So, Arjan, maybe we can go with you first. And Rodrigo, you can prepare your answers. I call it the rapid fire round. And Arjan, we'll start with you. What's your favorite book?
Well, I read a lot of books, but I'm presuming you want some fiction. One of my favorite writers is Tom Wolfe, and of course, being an aviation and space guy, The Right Stuff is my favorite one.
Okay, I'm going to pick that up. I've not read good fiction in some time, so this is definitely on my list. What about your favorite airline?
Well, that's an easy one. I started my career 15 years at the Blue Airline in Amsterdam, and it's the airline that brings me home after every business trip. So it's got to be that one.
How many of those little Delft Blue houses do you have? I see a couple behind you.
Yeah, I have more than a couple. Let's leave it at that.
I'm glad to know. What's your favorite city?
Ooh, my favorite city. I've had the privilege to travel a lot, but one of my favorite cities that I always like to go back to is Rome. I mean, it's a city with a great history. It's got great food, great people. I love to go to Rome, so that's got to be that one.
Okay, that's a good one. What about your favorite movie?
That's a good one actually. I'm a big fan of documentaries, but if you want to hear a movie, I like movies with multiple layers, and one of my favorites must be Inception.
Inception. Oh, the moment you said multiple layers, I knew it was Inception.
Yeah. What
about favorite documentary? No guest has mentioned a documentary, so I'm curious. What's your favorite documentary?
That's a very tough one. But I think the one about Chernobyl that I saw was very impressive. But there's many more of those. I think we can talk for an hour about that. we keep that for another podcast.
Yes, the next chat will be about documentaries and Arjan's favorite shows. What is something that you want to learn, Arjan?
Well, one of the things I am trying to learn and master is the Portuguese language, but that's a very tough challenge, I can tell you, being a Dutchman, but we'll give it a shot. And something else with the P is the piano. I'm constantly trying to develop that, but I started late in my life, so it's going slowly, but hoping to get there.
Okay, fantastic. What is the one piece of best advice that you've received?
Wow. I had a leader that I worked for in the past, and he was a big fan of Churchill. And Churchill had a lot of quotes with good advice. I gave him a book when he left, and when I read that book, there was one quote in there. What said was, "Attitude is a little thing that makes a big difference," and I think that's really important. We had a staff event recently where we said attitude brings us to altitude, and I think that's a great one for aviation.
I like that. I'm going to steal that one from you. Attitude and altitude. I like it. And finally, final question for you. Who do you look up to?
Who or what? I think I really look up to the engineering capability of our company. I think if I look at Embraer, what Embraer has achieved, and what we do and what we have done over the last couple of years is amazing. I am an aeronautical engineer by education, but I'm really, really impressed what the company delivers, and I think we have a very good engineering team that I think will bring Embraer a great future.
Thank you very much, Arjan. It has been a pleasure speaking with you today. Rodrigo, we move on to you right now with the same set of questions. Why don't we start with your favorite airline?
I actually liked it a lot, Varig in Brazil at that time. It was an excellent, really excellent airline. I'm proud of Brazil, and a lot of good people, I'd say. So it was. I miss that airline a lot.
I'm feeling nostalgic now. I remember those Varig 747s back in the day, early days. Yeah. You're right. What's your favorite book?
Crime and Punishment from Dostoevsky. I like a lot philosophy and those type of books that you dive into the human nature. That's
and hence, then, what's your favorite movie?
It's actually a little bit different. I like subtle changes in the history, and so I like it a lot. Parasite was very nice. I like because of philosophy. I like the Dead Poets Society. That was very nice as well.
Okay, good to know. What's your favorite city?
Santos. Santos is the city I was born. Santos is a city in the coast of Brazil, and it's famous because it's the city where Pelé played most of his career. So that's a nice city.
Okay, I just Googled it and I checked out where exactly on the map it is. So I would love to find out more. What is something you want to learn, Rodrigo?
I want to know more about diversity and how to make to bring that to the business, right? Making ours and the entire industry more diverse in terms of people. I have been studying that. It's such a sensitive subject, but at the same time, such an important subject to be addressed. So it's important to learn, and I always like to make things happen. So it's to learn how to introduce change.
That's good to know. And given you are working with Embraer and have a very, very, very global perspective, I'm sure this is something you're progressing on. Who do you look up to?
Osiris Silva. Osiris Silva is the founder of Embraer, right? And is still alive, 92 years old. And it's amazing the capacity of that guy to build this company, right? From scratch, what we have achieved today to be a global company. And he's still very active, it's still some time ago I was having a call with a guy that used to be the VP of engineering of Embraer. He's already retired. But Osiris called him, retired, said, guys, we need to do something to improve regional aviation. So please do something. So the guy asked me to, so Rodrigo, how can we help? So still the guy is very active at capacity of visionary, a visionary, right? And a visionary that can make things come true. And that's Embraer. I think we continue to build actually on that spirit.
Yeah. And this example shows how humble he is as well, and he's still active. This is the humility that stands out amongst the visionary people. And finally, what is the best advice you've received?
Everything shall pass, everything. When you are in a bad situation or in a good situation, you have to know that at a certain time, everything shall pass.
Words to live by. Thank you very much, Arjan and Rodrigo. I'm so glad that you are able to share some insights about the future of aviation and about Embraer's vision of how you're making the future of aviation greener and more sustainable. Thank you very much, both of you.
Shashank, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Shashank.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. Awareness is the key to a green future, so please give us your support to help our sustainable aviation insights reach a wider audience. You can do this by sharing us with your network or leaving a review. For more information on how aircraft emissions data can help you reach your sustainability goals, visit Cirium from the link in the show notes. You can start a conversation with us at podcast@simpliflying.com. And for more content on sustainable aviation, please visit our website, simpliflying.com, and join the movement.